Well, for the last 8 years, the war in Ukraine has been going on. Ukraine has been firing on residential and civilian areas in the Russian populated areas of Donbass. This is areas they do not control. This morning, we saw the largest attack on the people of Donbass since the war began. We're talking about civilian attacks. Take a look. That, what you just saw, was a barrage of 40 Ukrainian rockets hitting homes, shops, a cathedral, according to the mayor of Donetsk. Now, Mike Jones is a British journalist and expat living in Russia. He has an awesome channel on YouTube, I, Earl Grey. He has been traveling to the region of Donbass. He's been delivering presents to people there. He joins us today to talk about this escalation as well as what the conditions are. Can you tell us a little bit about the shelling that happened and what it's like to be there? Because we know that this shelling is not necessarily new. This is something they live with every day.
Yeah, that is precisely what it is. In the reports that I've seen, because we're about to go there very soon, and it was only about 3 weeks ago when we were there last. The reports I've seen is they believe it's a retaliation for the seemingly impending fall of Bakhmut, where we've seen this horrible concentration and conflict, almost like the First World War. So the theory being that Ukraine is lashing out at the people of Donetsk, and perhaps it's mind games because many of those soldiers serving there will no doubt have family. The last report that I saw said something like 80 civilians had been killed and 200 injured in what was an horrific week for the people of Donetsk.
It just sounds so unbelievable. And for those of us who don't live like that, how is this different than how they're living every day? You say that they're living with this, but what does that mean?
Well, when I was there last, it was just akin to rumbles of thunder in the background. So you'd have some seemingly close strikes where you go, oh, that one was pretty close. But everyone was going about their daily life, including myself. We were doing walk and talk videos where I featured Eva K. Bartlett, one of your previous guests that you've had here on Redacted before. So that was kind of just the normal life where you had this sort of rumble in the background. What we're talking about, I believe, in this, at least this past week, maybe two now, is something very different, very concentrated, particularly in the residential areas. It's quite clear from these strikes and instances that we've seen. And when I was looking at some of the impact sites, these were streets I've walked on outside hotels I stayed in. So it really struck me just sort of how vicious and calculated these predominantly HIMARS strikes, but I think there's also artillery, NATO artillery being used against these people.
And this is a region that was not expecting the combat to come right in the middle of civilian lives. It's not like Kherson, which was evacuated in anticipation of a ramping up of this war, right?
No, the fighting has always been pretty close to Donetsk. You may recall the airport and the battle for the Donetsk airport very early on back in 2014. When the Ukrainian anti-terrorist operation began. You don't hear that much mentioned, do you, about Ukraine's anti-terrorism operation, which is what they called it. So they have been on the front lines. They have suffered, as you've said, for 8 years already, but it seems that the pain is being dialed up.
Can you tell me about the flag behind you? Because I don't speak Russian.
Yes,
Can you explain
this
that?
is the Donetsk People's Republic flag. I spoke to Vladislav Dinego, who was formerly the foreign minister of the Lugansk People's Republic, just the day after his position was dissolved, because, of course, they've now been integrated with Russia. And it's this claim by the West that these were sham referenda, even at gunpoint, some of the quite hilarious stories, they are farcical to the people. When you tell them of these stories, it is literally beyond belief to them. They very much want to be part of Russia. They themselves, many of them view themselves as Russian. To allege or claim otherwise is really baffling for them. And it's quite sad to see the reaction in their eyes, because you see confirmation of the lack of understanding, confirmation of censorship, of propaganda, of twisting that. And then I sensed apathy in some of them where when I asked them to tell my Western audience, they just said, what's the point? And that really gets you. You know, what's the point? They'll never understand. We just want to live a peaceful life and we want this to come to an end. And we can all agree and understand that motive and what they're fighting for.
So a lot of what you do in your show is you read Western headlines and then you break down what is actually behind them, because so many of them are just so simplistic and telling a story of one bad guy and one good guy. And I feel like the rest of us are just missing the context and acting like, yeah, the war just started and we know who the good guy is.
Absolutely. I can agree to you. It's a very easy way to not think about what's just been said. You know, just I mentioned about these people's experiences, their motivations. Rather than have empathy and consider what it'd be like to be in their position, I see that reductionism as a very quick and easy way to dismiss what you just said. Oh, it's because you're a Putin puppet. And it's as ridiculous as you guys have reported, as we're seeing in the UK, where one of the ministers accused nurses of being Putin shills by wanting to strike for better pay conditions.
One thing we have in common is we're both expats and Westerners, and we're moving into places where people make a lot of assumptions about us and our politics based on just our accent. I've noticed that a lot of times there are people who might see me and think, oh, well, you must be for, Joe Biden, you must be for this, you must be for that. I'm not for anything. I'm only for peaceful living. And so it's interesting how the change in the perception of Westerners is changing right now. Is that something that you get as a Westerner living in Russia?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's changed in recent years, and it's so sad. So when I came back in 2018, this was to St. Petersburg, where we had the World Cup going on, and that was a magical time. You literally had the world come together in one place, and it was such a good vibe. There was very little upset or violence. In the UK, they have the hooligan side. None of that. Very well policed, very well organized, and there was a real celebration of obviously the sport, but obviously humans coming together from across the world. Of course, when I had my passport, when you buy a SIM card in a shop, you then had the it may as well had a light as it opened. Someone's a smile as they saw this British passport. Yeah. And then they're baffled. Why have you come to Russia of all places? Back then they were saying we're aspiring to head to the UK and London and all these things. Since then, very much reduced. There's still the curiosity, like, well, very odd of a British person to be here, but there's not that adoration or adulation that I witnessed back in 2018. And that, I understand it completely, but it's just one of those sad truths. And they're correct, I believe. The Russian people are seeing that what Putin was warning them about for years prior, about NATO, about the West, sadly was true. Medvedev was another one who used to be quite a strong advocate of doing business with the West, of appeasing them sometimes with their demands. Not anymore. And we know that Medvedev is probably one of the most vociferous voices condemning the West and the state that the West has seemingly slid into. And I'm not going to go into all those topics, but your viewers know exactly what I'm talking about.
Speaking of Western perceptions, I want to talk to you about a video that surfaced today of a reporter, a German reporter, doing what we call in the business a live shot. That means you are speaking on a microphone live to a studio. And he was explaining the sort of climate, the political climate in Russia, when someone who lived there came and gave him the finger. Take a look.
Und hat gesagt, dass sich freut, dass in Freiheit ist.
Christoph, dann lass uns noch einmal
Entschuldigung, wir
auf
haben hier
Putin
einen Mann, der uns
blicken.
etwas stört.
Fuck you,
Ja.
Germany.
Der berückt sich schon wieder. Also,
American, fuck you.
Ja.
Wir was будем вот так.
ja,
Wir blicken
dieser Mann
noch
hat
einmal.
uns gerade als deutsche Faschisten beschimpft. Ja, aber das müssen wir kurz übersetzen, entschuldige bitte. Der kam jetzt hier vorbei, hat uns als deutsche Faschisten beschimpft und hat auch noch unflätig sich dann gegenüber Amerika geäußert. Wir haben das gerade gehört. Aber ich muss sagen, solche Männer wie diese hier sind die absolute Ausnahme in Russland. Normalerweise können wir...
Now, obviously, we can't take too much from one person's reaction, but this is interesting because it seems like there is it may indicate that the West is wrong, that people don't feel like being Western is the pinnacle of humanity, that the West is not right about everything, that people don't uniformly agree to that. What is the temperature? Is this like, what can we extrapolate from this guy, if anything?
I happened to just be discussing this yesterday with my good friend John Mark Dugan and Masha, his Russian translator. She travels with him. So I had both perspectives, like from the West and from a native from Russia. And my feeling was, Masha was embarrassed. She thought, how could a Russian do that? It makes us look terrible. And I get that. I understand it. I've had similar feelings. But my observation, my comment to them was, I don't think this would have been as likely to have happened, let's say in 2018 or 2019, as it obviously it has occurred now. Now, it could have done if someone had too many drinks or whatever, but specifically the words used in that video as well, I thought were very key to communicating that sentiment, particularly with Germany and how belligerent Scholz has been and their behavior and actions. Yeah. And I think that's where we're seeing these feelings and emotions come to a head. And it's not something I'm used to observing from Russia. Generally, people are quite reserved, a bit like us Brits. They generally keep themselves to themselves and go about their business. So for someone to be motivated enough to interrupt this German reporter's report and also to say the things he did, I think is quite a strong indicator of building rising sentiment among the... Well, you can't say he represents the Russian people, but certainly a component of Russian society.
Interesting. So thanks to Mike. And again, we got the rain going here. So interesting to see his perspective. And obviously, as we point out in the chat, like... This is one person's perspective who lives in Russia, but is also in Donetsk right now, and he's there and can speak on what he's seeing. The Western media won't cover this story.
Right.
The Western media has been completely absent from Donetsk, completely absent from Donbass. And so you get one-sided stories from the Western media that come out of, if they're lucky, from Kiev. And reporters who aren't even there covering this genocide that's been unfolding in this region for 8 long years. So, interesting to see his perspective.
Yes. So watch his show, I, Earl Grey. I do on a regular basis because I feel like it gives you a real glimpse into what's there, much, much more so than just opening up headlines and then deciding how the world works based on those headlines.
Right. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.